Welcome to the Soul Surgery Podcast. I am your host, Nikki Clinch, and today I am sharing with you an episode on my journey and my learnings and my training with psychedelics and plant medicine. There are a few intentions for this episode. One, I want to share with you my own personal journey, my own personal healing, what I faced, what I shifted, what I released, and how it has impacted and changed my life, and how I worked with it in integration in how it changed my life, and also to bring awareness and consciousness to the process of working with plant medicines and psychedelics, why it may be beneficial for you, why it's not for everyone, and how you may go about on embarking on this journey. So I hope that you find this episode useful. I hope that you have some insights and healing in your listening to it. If you do have any aha moments or big shifts or insights, please do share them with me, because I love hearing your healing. You know, write to me, DM me on social media, or you can email me or comment under one of the YouTube videos, and just let me know where in the video did you have any big shifts and why, and how did it impact you. And also, if you love this episode and you are loving soul surgery, please do subscribe and leave me a review. Your reviews really matter to me. Your words, your thoughts, your feelings, your reflections on this podcast and the work here really matters. Reviews matter because it helps this work spread further and far and wide to as many people as possible. So please do leave a review. So thank you for listening. I'm not going to waffle on anymore. Let's get straight into the episode on the Soul Surgery Podcast. So hello everyone. I am going to share with you a pretty big journey of mine, and there are two parts to this journey, so these are going to be released in 2 episodes. So this episode is going to be part 1, and I'm going to be sharing with you my journey, my teachings, my trainings, what I've learned, what I've healed from working with psychedelics and plant medicine. And also to share some awareness and insights into how you might go about working with these medicines, what I've learned that is important for you to know, or I feel is important for you to know, and just some guidance if you feel a calling to dive into working with plants and psychedelics. So let's kind of call this psychedelics and plant medicine 101. And I want to really be clear here. I am not a curandero. I am not a maestro. I don't lead plant medicine ceremonies. I don't lead psychedelic circles. I have done a lot of training with it, not a huge amounts, but a lot, enough, and I have learned an enormous amount. But I am a consumer. I am not a producer of this work. So I just want to be clear on that. I'm here sharing my journey and what I have learned and what I have shifted from it, in hope that that would be useful for you to hear. So I'm going to talk about my first ever journey in working with plant medicines. So I was 30, and by this time, and so what, that is 11 years ago. By this time, I had already been clean from my addictions for 10 years. And even though I had done a lot of work on myself already, meaning I had attended trauma treatment, I had done work on codependency. I had worked the 12 steps 3 times. I had been in 12-step programs for 10 years. I'd been in therapy for 10 years. I mean, that's a substantial amount of work. And I had come a long way since being the drug addict. And, you know, I was pretty unwell when I rock bottomed from addiction at 20. But what was really interesting was 10 years in, you know, even though a lot of my life now looked pretty normal and was pretty tidy, if you want to say it that way, I was still struggling internally with a lot of demons. You know, I didn't look like the drug addict. I was working now. I wasn't getting fired from jobs. I was making money. I was paying off debt. You know, I was being kind of a good citizen. I was being a good girl. You know, I wasn't acting out in my eating disorders. But I was still suffering a lot internally. You know, I experienced enormous amounts of fear and shame. And I was in a relationship at the time, and I was so in love with this guy, absolutely head over heels in love with him. But it wasn't a loving relationship. And even though it wasn't loving, I seemed to keep going back. And it was like I was punishing myself somehow. And so I was in this state in my life where, you know, everyone looked at me like I was better. And I really was better compared to where I was, but I wasn't free. In fact, I was far from free. Inside, I felt really, really unfree. And there was I was still carrying a lot of shadow, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And I wanted to be a mama, and I wanted to have a family, and I wanted to create a home, and I didn't know how to do these things. You know, every time I got close to it, I would find a way to sabotage, or I would choose people that would push me away. So I didn't feel like I was getting any closer to being able to realizing these dreams of mine. And so, you know, I was with a guy at the time who had done a lot of work with ayahuasca. And so he'd spoken a lot to me about it. And I never felt a calling to. I was just really interested to hear his experience, but I didn't feel called myself until I did. I remember very clearly, you know, things were really coming to a head inside of me, just enormous amounts of self-loathing and lack of trust and shame just kept waving through me all the time. And then all of a sudden I got to this phase where ayahuasca just kept being mentioned to me. You know, first the guy I was with at the time, and then I would be walking down the street and I would bump into an old friend and they'd say that, oh, they've just started working with ayahuasca. And then I'd open a magazine and then there'd be an article about ayahuasca. And then I remembered I put on a program on the television, and there was a documentary on ayahuasca. And it just started to get to this point that I was feeling called. Like everywhere I turned, ayahuasca was calling me. And then one day, I walked into the living room of the flat that I was living in with this guy, and he was watching a YouTube video. And there was this man on the YouTube video, and he was speaking, teaching. I didn't really hear even what he was teaching about. But all of a sudden, I looked at him on the video and I just felt this unbelievable knowing that I was meant to work with this man. And I literally stopped in my tracks and I said to my boyfriend, "Oh my God, I need to work with him. Who is he? I meant to work with him." And so I discovered that this man was a shaman. And he was a shaman in Peru. He was an American. And he'd been a shaman in Peru for 30 years. And they called him the Gringo Shaman. And I just knew that I was meant to work with this man. Within a few days, I had contacted him. And I said, "I know this sounds strange, but I think I'm meant to work with you. And so I'm coming. Can I come?" And he wrote back pretty quick. And he said, "Yeah, sure. Come and work with me. And I'll meet you at the airport." And it was just so easy. And so literally within a week, I had planned that I would be out there for 5 weeks and that I would go and I would spend the first 2 weeks working with this shaman. And then the last 2.5 weeks I would work at another center, and that I would do 5 weeks of dieta and I would go on my own. I'm going to talk a bit about what dieta is in a minute. You know, at the time, I didn't even think twice about any of this. But when I look back on it now, I realize that's pretty gung-ho. Like, I don't think I would ever recommend to anybody to be 30 and go out to Peru on your own, to go and, you know, work with plants intensely 5 weeks back to back for your very first time. But I honestly didn't even think twice. You know, during that time, things got even worse between me and this guy. The fights were just getting terrible. The pain inside of me just got worse and worse. Just this absolute emptiness and hollowness in me, and the shame. It was almost like as soon as I'd booked my flight and booked this trip, everything that I had been suffering from just exaggerated by about 1,000,000 times. And now I look back on it and I've done the work, I can tell you that's really common. You know, once you make the commitment that you are going to be in this process with the plants, the work already begins. So now I know, with hindsight, ayahuasca was already showing me all that was getting in the way of my freedom. And it was pretty painful. So when I actually got on the plane, the boyfriend that I was with at the time and I were pretty much on the verge of breaking up. And I remember getting on the plane feeling completely alone in the world. You know, I was so in love with this guy and it was ending. It was dying. And I didn't know how to fix it. And I didn't know how to let love in. And I didn't know how to do things differently. And I sat on the plane and I cried all the way to Lima. And when I got to Lima, I had one night in Lima and I remember being terrified, just hiding in my hotel room, wondering, what am I doing? Why am I here? Like, I don't even know how I got here. And yet I'm here. And yet I know I'm meant to be here, and it didn't make any sense. And I just had to feel it all. It was like being turned inside out. And I didn't sleep. You know, rushes of fear were moving through me, rushes of shame. And the next morning I got on a plane and I flew into Iquitos, which is, you know, the town heading into the Amazon. And, you know, I was on this little plane on my own, And I looked out the window and there it was. There was the Amazon. And honestly, it doesn't matter how many nature programs you've watched, it is like nothing I have ever seen. It is so big and so powerful and so vast. It just went on forever. And there was this energy that comes off it that is just like ancient. And I could feel in every pore of my being that there was enormous wisdom to be learned here. And I was terrified. So I landed in Iquitos and, Ron picked me up at the airport. And he's this, wild American shaman, in shorts and flip-flops and long hair and a long beard. And I'm like, what am I doing here? Like, how did I get here? I'm just this girl on my own. I don't even know this guy. And yet everything felt right. And, now I know my mind was just, trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense. And my heart was just going, follow, follow, follow. And so Ron took me to his place in the middle of the Amazon. And at the time, this was 10 years ago, I know it's changed since then. It was just one big hut called the Maloka, and then his little place, and then like outdoor showers, and that was it. And I was the only one there. And as soon as I got there, he took one look at me and he told me to put my bags down and, wash my face. And then he said, come and meet me in my hut. And I went and met him in the hut. And I didn't know what was happening. And he told me how we were going to begin. And he took one look at me and he said, first, we detox. And, he knew that I had done a lot of drugs. He knew that I had done a lot of alcohol and drugs and abuse to my body. And so he said, first I needed to begin with working with a plant called ohe, which now I have some hindsight, and I've spoken to more people who work with plants. Ohe is a pretty hardcore plant to work with, full stop, let alone it being the first one that you ever work with. So ohe is a medicine that is often given to heroin addicts to have deep, deep, deep detoxification in the body. And so first I had to physically detox, and then I had to do a spiritual detox. So I drank the ohe. I don't really remember what it tasted like. And only after I drank it did Ron say, well, it's poison. And I'm like, what? And he goes, when you drink it, but then now we have to purge it out. If you don't purge it out, it can kill you. And I was like, holy crap, like this is terrifying. So I then had to drink like 7-8 liters of water, like buckets of water, literally buckets of water. And the next thing I knew, I was outside on the earth in the Amazon, and I was purging for about 7 hours. And he would keep coming out to me with another bucket of water, and I was just begging him, going, I can't drink anymore. And he was like, you have to, darling, you have to. And then I would drink it and I would just purge more. And I remember there was a moment when I was literally in the dirt, and I was hands and knees in the dirt, and I was purging out of both ends. And I just felt so humbled. And I just looked up at the trees, and I looked up at the sky, and I just felt God with me. And I remember praying for courage to keep moving forwards. And it just was a really humbling moment. as my body was just releasing and releasing and releasing. When I was done, Ron made me the most beautiful chicken broth soup. And then he said, now it's time for your spiritual detox. And you have to do 7 days. And you have to sit on your bed for 7 days in complete silence. And you don't leave your bed unless you need the loo. And you will be brought food twice a day. And I said, why? And he goes, Nikki, you have no center. You have no core. You're like a leaf blowing around in the wind. We need to help you first have strength on the inside before we can do any work with the rest of the plants. And it was only when he said it that I realized it was absolutely true. I had no real sense of self. I'd done a lot of the external work, but the deep internal work, this was the beginning. I'd done a lot of talking about feelings and talking about my past, but this was now training to build a really solid core sense of self and center. So I sat on my bed and I began. And the first 4 days was like torture. It was like ants crawling all through my body and I couldn't stop fidgeting. It was just like hell. My mind was just going mental, noise and noise and noise and noise, and the resistance in me was just unbearable and just irritated and angry and frustrated and uncomfortable, and I just squirming around in my skin. And I wrote on a piece of paper and I begged him to let me stop. And he goes, no, this is a mountain for you to climb, but if you can do this, which I believe you can, this will be with you for the rest of your life. And he is absolutely true. It really has. And so I went back to my bed and I continued. And after about day 5, something started to shift. And I started to notice that these thoughts would come and then they would go, and then they would come and they would go. And it was the first time in my life I was able to just sit and be as I witnessed them come and go without them tearing me up. And then I would watch my emotions come and I would feel them, and then they would go. And then they would come and they would go. And because I had no distractions, and because I had nowhere to go and nowhere to run, I just was in a complete state of surrender. And again, it was the first time in my life I had ever experienced just being, while emotions moved through me and I would feel them and then they would pass. And I watched this happen for the final days, 3 days of just witnessing my mind and my emotions coming and going and coming and going. And it was the most unbelievable thing I had ever experienced. And when I finished that 7 days, it was the first time in my whole 30 years that I had ever experienced what it felt like to be free. And I realized I had been a leaf, just being blown around in the storm by my own emotions and thoughts. And this was the first time I experienced any real freedom. And only after my 7 days did Ron let me work with ayahuasca. Now, over that 5 weeks when I was in the jungle, I worked with ayahuasca 10 times. But I also dieted several plants. And so a dieter is when you are dedicated to, I would say it's a training to work deeply with the plants, not just going and having an ayahuasca ceremony, but you are literally cleansing your body, clearing your whole entire body of all energies of anything else, so that you can then work with all these different plants, and you're so cleansed inside that you can hear the teachings of the plants really clearly. And so I was only eating 2 meals a day of rice and a piece of plantain, and sometimes a bit of fish, and sometimes a bit of chicken, or sometimes just lentils with no salt, no flavor, super simple, and, simple life. And my body would become so clean that then when I would work with the plants that Ron, specifically prescribed for me and my healing and my training, I would be able to hear the teachings of the plants really clearly. So as well as working with ayahuasca every other day, at the beginning after Ohe, I worked with tobacco. And by the way, tobacco tastes terrible. I mean, it's literally like, there's no words. There are no words. It's like drinking ash from an ashtray. But it was seriously powerful. I dieted tobacco for a week, and the dreams I had were just profound, like enormous dreams about my past and my childhood and my mother and me, and just profound dreams. And then I would go into ayahuasca ceremonies. Now, over those 5 weeks, I can say this just in one big block, all my ayahuasca ceremonies were really challenging. I didn't have a single eye-opening, light and beautiful visions. I was purging a lot, and there was a lot of shadow that I had to face and be with. And, the first ceremony with ayahuasca, while I was dieting tobacco, I just had so much terror move through me that, it was like being in a nightmare. And there was no way to get out. And, there was no clarity. I didn't know, I was really disorientated. I didn't know whether I was up or down, and it was not enjoyable at all. All I remember was this terror that I was feeling. Now I look back on it, I realize that's because there was that much terror in my body that I had been completely avoiding and resisting. And so for most of those 5 weeks, ayahuasca made me face and feel the terror that I was carrying in my body and the trauma from why the terror was there in my body. After tobacco, I then worked with a tree called Chuchirowasi. And the Chuchirowasi tree is one of the biggest trees in the Amazon. And it was my favorite plant or tree to work with, because the spirit of Chuchirowasi is all about strength, being solid as its trunk, being solid with its roots. And I remember working with Chuchirowasi that week and just starting to feel for the first time something that might be strength in me, not external strength, but internal strength. And my listening became really deep. And it was so remarkable because by this time I'd been dieting on only plants and very, very simple foods for 2.5 weeks now. And I remember sitting outside the Maloka, and there used to be these monkeys, and they'd be all in the trees, these cute little monkeys. And 2.5 weeks in, while I was working with Chuchirowasi, the monkeys just came down and were walking on the ground, and they would walk over my legs. And I just said to Ron, I said, why are they doing that? And he said, well, you've cleansed so much and you've been working with plants so much that the monkeys no longer experience you as a human. They experience you as a plant. That's why they don't see you. They don't see you as human. That's why they're walking over you, and because your energy is taking on the energy of the plants. And it was so powerful, because that's how it works when you're dieting. You're taking on the energy of the plant to learn, to heal, to be trained by the plants. And my ayahuasca ceremonies were continuing the way that they were, just a lot of purging and thrashing around and terror and it's seriously nothing nothing beautiful at all. And I really didn't enjoy them at all. So after I finished, my 2.5 weeks at Ron's, I packed my bags and then I went off to another center and I continued my dieta. And at this other center, I worked with, I can't even remember what plants I worked with there. But I remember by this time I was starting to have more shifts in my ayahuasca ceremonies. I was getting more and more still and quiet. And, something was starting to change in me, even though I didn't quite recognize it or why. I was thinking about my boyfriend less, obsessing about it less, and starting to feel more still inside. In one of my ayahuasca ceremonies, I remember distinctly asking ayahuasca to teach me how to love, to teach me what love is. And I remember in that ceremony, she showed me birthing my daughter. And at the time in the ceremony, in the vision, I had someone standing next to me, but I couldn't see his face. So I just assumed it was my boyfriend that I was with at the time. But in the vision, they handed me the baby and I looked in her eyes. And when our eyes met, I was just absolutely overcome with the most unbelievable love. And it broke me open and I just grieved and grieved and grieved. I must have been crying and releasing for hours. Now I look back on it, I realized that was the birth of my daughter, Taya. And the man standing next to me was not the boyfriend I was with at the time, but my husband. And it did actually turn out that way. And then I had another ceremony, which was so powerful when I became a plant. But I was speaking words, and the words would come out of me like the pollen of flowers. And I would speak words, and when I was speaking words of gossiping or judgment or anger or hate or anything destructive or coming from a destructive place, I would watch the pollen float out of me and then land on other flowers, and the flowers would die. And then when I would speak words of love and truth and authenticity and coming from a place of integrity, the pollen would come out of me and land on the flowers and they would bloom. And it was so profound. Ayahuasca was teaching me, and she said, your words are extremely powerful. Communication is one of your greatest gifts. Use your words wisely. Be responsible with your words. Your words have impact. And that teaching has stayed with me to this day. So I carried on and, dieting and still only eating 2 meals a day. And by this time, I really had lost a lot of weight. And then my final ceremony came. And it was a really tough one. Again, like this complete disorientation and terror and just absolute like being in hell. And it was just constant facing shadow. And I was literally squirming and sweating and purging. And, it was a really difficult ceremony. And that was my final one. And ayahuasca showed me, she just kept making me face how much I had abandoned myself and how much damage that had done to my heart and my soul and my energy. Every time I gave my power away to other people, every time I gave my power away to boyfriends and friends, every time I abandoned my own truth, she just kept making me face it and feel it and face it and feel it and see the damage that was doing to me, to my own soul. And then she said to me, no more. From this moment onwards, no more victim. You will live a life of responsibility. You will be responsible for yourself. And it was like, honestly, I couldn't deny it. The teaching was so loud and clear. And I came out of that ceremony and I had literally felt like I'd been in a washing machine. And the shaman came up to me and he put his hand on my head and he said to me, "My dear, you are haunted by your past. Like you have ghosts haunting you about your past. But what you don't realize is that the only one that can free you from your past is you. You have to choose. You have to choose to release it. You have to choose to release your attachment to it." And his words went through me like glass. They were so powerful. As I packed my bags the next day, ready to head home, I was remembering those last two teachings. It was time now for me to be responsible, and it was my choice. No one was going to come and save me. No one was going to come and make it different. I had to choose whether I was going to be ready to release the past and start creating a new life, a new story, a new possibility for myself. And he was right. I had been so addicted to my story that all that washing machine I was going round and round in, that was me, just spinning around and round in the same old drama and story and struggle and pain that I was addicted to. I had been so identified with it. And so as I flew home, these two learnings were just sitting with me profoundly. And then I realized that the real work was now about to begin. You know, the most powerful part of working with plants and psychedelics, of course the ceremonies are important. Of course they're profound. But the big healing happens in the integration. The big healing happens when you go home. What are you willing to be responsible for, to change in your life and in yourself? And that's the part where your life changes. So when I got home, I walked through the door, and for the first couple days, I was kind of back in that wanting this guy to love me, and we were back and forth, and then I remembered the teachings, and I said, this is not being responsible for myself. This is part of my past. And so I packed my bags and I said goodbye, and I left that relationship 2 weeks after I returned from Peru. And I got in the car and I drove off. I remember it was 1 a.m. And I remember as I was driving off this feeling that I was driving away from something that I was leaving behind me forever. And yes, it was that relationship, but it was a part of who I had been. It was a way I had been being me, that I was no longer willing to give my power away. I was no longer willing to be that victim, that I was willing now to be fully committed to being responsible for who I was being and how I was going to take care of myself in my life, not just externally, but internally, for my worth, my value, my integrity, and my truth. And the next phase of my life after that trip in Peru was fundamentally transformational. You know, I came back to London. I got a job. I paid my way through my final years of training to do the work I do now. I studied hard, and I graduated, and I did my finals, and I did really, really well. And I completed my training, and I became certified to be a facilitator and a counselor. And I paid off all my bills, and I took care of myself, and I started loving myself. And 8 months later, I met my husband. I met my husband in a transformational program, and I took one look at him and I was like, hey, I feel like I know this guy. And we took it slow and we became friends first. And then we decided that we were in love and we wanted to make a life together. And we bought a home and we made a home, and it was the first time in my life we made a home. And then I got pregnant and I had Taya, and when I gave birth to Taya, it was exactly as the vision showed me in that ceremony. And it just continued this way, where the root and the core of the way that I was living was steeped in these learnings. I will be responsible for who I am being, 100% responsible. And it is my choice on whether I get to be free of my past or not. And it was 10 years between that first trip to Peru before I went back. And that will be in the next episode. I feel like that first trip for me was my initiation into womanhood. Stepping out of the young wounded child, the young girl, and stepping into the embodiment of my womanhood. Being responsible, being the adult. Being a stand for myself and my truth. And you know, I wouldn't be here doing this today if I hadn't gone through that journey. So a few, I suppose, pieces of guidance or teachings for you. You know, often if you're hearing ayahuasca showing up in your life a lot, it's probably she's calling you. But I do want to say, and this may be controversial to say, I don't believe that ayahuasca is for everybody. I think it can be used almost recreationally, and I don't agree with that. You know, when I was there, it was an intense training. You know, it wasn't just some one-hit wonder. It was an absolute training of the mind, body, heart, and soul in every way. And it wasn't just the ceremonies that was part of the training. It was all of it, the discipline, the commitment, the consistency. You know, it was a spiritual training. So if you feel called to work with the plants, then the first thing I would say is make sure you work with someone that has come to you through recommendation, that you know that they are trustworthy and that they have good energy and they are coming from the right place, of a place of integrity. Because there are many that are not coming from a place of integrity out in the jungle. If you are going to work with the plants, go with a very clear intention to do the work, to go and do the work, not just have a big experience. Big experiences are they're like one night stands. They're like big orgasms. but the real work is in the commitment. It's in the long term. It's in the consistency. So if you're going to go, make a commitment to go and do the work and spend, I would say, at least 10 days, if not 2 weeks. And if you can, to dieta, to not just work with ayahuasca, but work with the other plants, because they are profoundly powerful. One of the shamans I worked with at the second center I was at, you know, he was, to this day, one of the wisest human beings I have ever sat with. And he just spoke immense wisdom. And I said to him, where did you learn all of this? You know, what books did you read? Where did you learn this? And he said, I haven't read any books. You know, I got put in the middle of the jungle when I was 12 years old, and I was left there for 2 years as part of my training. And I learned everything from the plants. Not just ayahuasca, But the trees and all the other plants, there are so many teachings, so many wise plants, and they have so many different learnings to gift us with. So if you can go in dieta, then do that, because it's a training and a healing in the mind, heart, body, soul. To be able to learn how to do things with that much integrity and discipline, that in itself is an immense training. And so I would highly recommend that. And so when I say I don't think it's for everybody, I really mean that. Ayahuasca is for those who are already feeling relatively solid. If you are feeling like you have mental imbalances, or your energy is really depleted, or you're feeling really weakened in yourself, then first go and get strong in your health before going out. Of course, you don't need to be perfect, but ayahuasca is exceptionally powerful. And if you are not energetically strong enough, I think it can be not damaging, but it can really take a long time to integrate. So, make sure that you get strong in health and make it a commitment to get ready to go and do this work. Eat well, exercise, meditate, get yourself ready in all areas of your being, so that you go there coming from the right place, not just to be fixed, but to learn. And what else do I want to say? Yeah, the most important part is the integration. The big experience will only take you so far. You'll have this amazing experience, but then it'll just be a memory one day. If you don't integrate, it'll just become a memory. Everything changes and happens in the integration, and that's when you come home. So after you work with the plants, what are you committed to doing and being a stand for in your integration? When you come home, what are you willing to let go of? Who are you willing to be? What are you willing to face? How are you willing to change? That is where the real work is. So I hope that this has been useful for you. In part 2, I am going to speak about when I returned to the jungle. And that was only last year. It was exactly 10 years, almost to the day, from when I returned the first trip. So I hope that you have found this useful. I hope that you have found something to learn from. I hope you found it valuable. And thank you for listening.